Greetings and welcome to In-Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. Labor and the value of labor are conversations on the lips of many at this point in time. We're very happy to be joined by Minister of Labor, Mc Clashie, for a conversation on a raft of issues. Welcome, Minister. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Welcome to you also.
And I'm really happy to have this opportunity. But even before we go any deeper into the conversation, I want to ask, do you have a role at this point, if any, in some of these salary wage negotiations that are taking place at this point in time?
Technically, yes and no. The yes part is that the daily paid workers under the NUGFW are considered workers under the Industrial Relations Act. And if they should have any problems with their negotiation, they then come to the Ministry of Labor for reconciliation before it goes to the industrial court if it needs to get there. However, for the monthly paid workers in the public service, they are not considered as workers under the Industrial Relations Act, and they are guided by the Civil Service Act. And under the Civil Service Act, there is a process for dealing with negotiations, which starts with the CPO. Then if it goes to a stalemate, it goes to the Minister of Finance. And if that also gets modeled, then it goes to the industrial court and a special tribunal headed by the head of the Essential Services Division, who would then incorporate two other judges from the court, and they will do the final determination as to the issues that were brought to the court for resolution. So in that sense, I have absolutely no input with regards to that part of the negotiations. That is managed under the Civil Service Act.
And I'm really happy we're able to have this conversation, because you see the way that you're able to just rattle off this information, Minister, and it begs the question though, what are some of the things to your knowledge from where you sit that may not be looked or maybe overlooked, that we're not focusing on at this point in time when we think about labor and the labor landscape in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, one of the things that we have with labor, because it's normally the sensational parts where there is conflict and there is need for resolution, everybody then says that the labor ministry should get involved and that kind of thing. But outside of that, the Ministry of Labor is a lot more than conflict resolution. In fact, we're about creating the agenda and creating the legislation and the regulations and so on that will guide us in the way we work and to ensure that workers are protected and that their rights and privileges are not trampled upon. And we do that essentially by adopting and changing legislation in the form of adopting ILO conventions where we find that it makes sense and that it has the benefit for Trinidad and Tobago. Right now, we are actively seeking to revise a number of legislative acts that are before the Industrial Relations Committee. We have a couple of them in front of Cabinet right now, including the revamp of the Industrial Relations Act and the Severance and Benefits Act. And therefore, one of the major issues that is lacking right now really is modernized legislation. We recognize that, but that takes time because of the amount of consultations that is required before you actually get to a point where you have consensus among parties. So we expect that by the 2022-2023 legislative agenda, we should have at least 3 pieces of legislation coming forward in that modernization process. So People don't seem to think that they associate us with conflict management, but we're much more.
And I really like the fact that there are a few things that you said, and I want to pull some of those dots together, please.
Sure.
Building consensus, having things take place over a specific timeline, modernizing legislation, regulations that we operate by, and then looking at the fact that there's so much more than just conflict resolution. One of those things that the pandemic would have shown us is that things can literally change overnight, Minister. How does the experience of the pandemic filter in and influence some of the agenda that you're trying to push, some of the legislation that you're trying to move forward with regard to doing the best by labor?
Well, the pandemic has taught us that we are quite resilient and that things don't have to take as long as they usually do. My own experience is for years, I've been told that people would not accept electronic signatures and so on. And in 1 week after the pandemic, in an institution I was working at, we were able to start doing electronic approvals. So really and truly, we sometimes hide behind bureaucracy, we hide behind processes that may be archaic. And what the pandemic has taught us is that we do have the ability to think outside the box. We do have the ability to adapt quickly, and that we should. Whether or not those changes are sustainable is yet to be seen, and that not every organization and every kind of work will now lend itself to what we call the new way of work and digitization and so on. Some places you just have to be there physically. But by and large, my wish is that people see the opportunity in reducing bureaucracy, increasing productivity, and allowing people to work in what we consider a new normal, which is split between virtual and actual physical presence. So the idea, let me give you an example, the idea of people traveling from South to Port of Spain every day, and I make that commute very regularly. And what I have found is I generally stay at home a lot more now, and I get a lot more done because I have 4 hours that are free to me that I would have otherwise been occupied driving from San Fernando to Port of Spain. Now, in terms of my productivity, I don't have to sit down whole day and eyeball people, in that I can sit remotely, have a conversation as we are having it now, and continue seamlessly to do other things, and my productivity will have shot up significantly. So we need to look at those things and bring in the conversation of productivity, as well as convenience and cost savings and so on, to the workers. And also, it brings not only some good things, it brings some bad things, because now you have to reconfigure your home. Who pays for the desk? Who pays for the chair? Who pays for the computer? If you get damaged at work, you know where you are. If you get damaged at home, are you at work or are you at home? And therefore, these things are issues that are high on the discussion totem pole with regards to how do you incorporate all these new changes in the legislative items that you're going to bring forward.
And Minister, if you had a collection plate, you could have get all my money with some of the things you just said. I remember one friend was asking a friend of mine at one point in time, everything all right with Dike? I see him sleeping in Woodford Square. And it's because if you don't reach early, very early most times, you're very late, because 5 minutes can make the difference of so many hours in traffic. But in the last 1.5 minutes we have on this side of the conversation, do you think that sort of modernization, moving towards working out these things, being this hybrid model that hopefully establishes itself a little more. Do you think it is more mindset or physical infrastructure? Because I can imagine some people saying, well, this is what I'm used to, so everybody come out to work, versus even the conversations that we would have had at some point in time. How about we stagger the working hours so that there's less traffic on the road? Because after I sit in traffic 2.5 hours, my ankle just hurting from moving between X and gas, X and brake, X and brake. I am less productive. So is it mindset? Is it physical infrastructure?
I think it's mostly mindset, because people get accustomed to seeing people in a space. And many bosses, many employers feel that if you're not in that space, you're not producing. The pandemic has put a light to that. And therefore, now that we are out, I think we tend to go back to learned behavior and what is normal and what we are comfortable with. But I want to put out there that if we make ourselves a little uncomfortable, we more than likely will benefit from the additional productivity and flexibility and work-life balance that we all look for.
And I think that is a beautiful point to take a short break. We come back, we're speaking about labor issues with the Minister of Labor, Mc Clashie. Stay with us, we return with more. Welcome back. We are going in depth on labor and labor relations. We are speaking with the Minister of Labor, Mc Clashie. And Minister, you spoke about the fact that mindset, it factors in so heavily on what it is we're doing. And that also begs the question about the role of the tripartite system as it relates to labor in Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, the tripartite system is a proven methodology for getting people to sing from the same song sheet. In Trinidad and Tobago, I believe that the failure of the tripartite system, blame can be put on many sides. We can say that the government was not robust enough in terms of putting things in place. We could say the unions were touchy-feely. We could say that the business community have selfish aims. But I think at the end of the day, in every country where you have these mechanisms in place, it's really about the country. And in Trinidad, my own view is that tripartism is not yet there. I think, however, that we need to wheel and come again with a different approach to it. Maybe we need to look at legislation, because this has been legislated in many countries across the world, so that whether one government goes and the next one comes, there is a clear indication of what are the expectations, what are the reporting mechanisms, what are the discussions that will be held, and where those discussions will be held, who would be running the various subcommittees, and so on. And I think one of the things that we lacked here is that we did not have enough structure around the mechanism of how these disparate entities will deal, particularly in time of conflict. When things are going good and everybody is singing and holding hands and clapping, then there is no need. But when there is real and present difficulty in having strong conversations, then it all falls apart at the seams. So I am looking at a new process for reintroducing tripartism, which I will have to take to the cabinet for approval, and hopefully we could, and I believe strongly we can make it work, and make it work to the benefit of Trinidad and Tobago.
But Minister, do you think it might be a case of himself told himself? I use the same analogy of the song sheet, in the sense that if you have 3 prongs, but it seems as though one party has, I guess, overriding interest in 2 of those prongs? Might it be a matter of, okay, well, is one person in the main writing the songs and the other person might just be doing some of the illustration, doing the artwork on the cover? How do you answer that person asking that question?
Well, that's part of the issue globally with tripartite movement. And that is why many jurisdictions, as I indicated, went towards legislation and clearly defining how long those prongs are and how sharp those prongs are and who hold what prongs. And therefore, when you readjust the thinking among parties in terms of who really carries the weight, it should be an equal weight, but with the understanding that at the end of the day, whether you jump high or jump low, it is government prerogative to accept or reject various proposals and recommendations. But in terms of the process, if that is clearly identified and articulated, and there are mechanisms put in place for the dialogue. So for instance, if legislation says, by way of example, that every 6 months all the parties should meet in a public forum and address particular issues of the work that was done 6 months before, then clearly both the union, the government, and private enterprise knows that this is a forum in which we can distill and speak to various things and bring the national community up to date. Outside of those kinds of, what I would call it, outside of those kinds of processes, then what we do in a real sense is who makes the loudest noise gets the prize. And we need to move away from that. That's my personal view on it.
All right, and thank you so much for that. And I like the fact that it seems as though there's a lot of partnership, a shared accountability and responsibility in the mindset that you're coming with. And I want to continue on that, although on a slightly different tangent though. Who are the major partners of the ministry, and especially within the context of labor, work, job, careers being possibly a little different or looked at a little different since the pandemic? What is the relationship between the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service and the Ministry of Education? Because one of the things that we've had is a conversation of the role of TVET courses, trade, artisans. How do those factor in? Or do people have those conversations after they're out of school and somebody tell them, best you go learn a trade? And even like raising the stature and validating different sorts of careers in this space?
Well, we need a total government approach here, because you mentioned education and youth development, both of which will train and develop young citizens into the future workforce. But we also have to bring into consideration the Ministry of Trade, the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of National Security, just to name a few. And if we put all these things together, we soon realize that if you develop people educationally, you train them, you prepare them, and then there are no jobs. This is where, for instance, trade and industry, through their InvestTT and other arms, who would want to bring new business into Trinidad and by extension, new jobs, we need to give the local businessmen incentives to invest more, and through investment, these jobs will be created. We need to ensure that citizens are safe to and from their place of work, and therefore national security issues become into play. So I said all of that to say this, that it's really a one government approach, a total government approach where all the arms of government really contributes to the welfare of our citizens as we develop them for the world of work. So there is no specific one and only approach through the ministries of youth development or education that we are taking. We are looking at all the tentacles, as you said just now, and bringing those together to create the employment and work for all.
And what about actually creating jobs or individuals creating jobs for themselves, as opposed to saying, okay, well, I'm learning a specific skill to work for somebody? How does that entrepreneurship factor in?
Well, I speak to young people all the time, and I tell them that unlike my day when you got a job from the cradle to the grave, that no longer exists. There is now the notion of intransitory employment where people and some youths, including my own children, do not necessarily see themselves working for anybody for the next 25 years. So what they do is they take different gigs, or 2 years here, 5 years here, travel. But more importantly, what I tell people is identify your passion and turn your passion into your employment. So if you have a green thumb and you like landscaping, go into landscaping. If you like baking, learn tricks and go into pastry. You do not have to work for anybody for the entire rest of your life. We have within us the ability to create and to manifest that creation in a tangible and profitable way. So we need to change mindsets about I have to get a government work, and I have to get a URP work, and I have to get a CPEP work, and I have to get a regional corporation work. There is so much more that individuals can do on their own, and there are mechanisms, for instance, through NETCO and so on, who would provide startup capital for such individuals. So my admonition to all those young people outside there listening to my voice, take your passion and turn it into your business.
And I think that is that is the words that we want to close on. You see, we didn't have opportunity to go into supply chain issues and how they impact labor here, both in terms of machinery and the workforce, human resource. But hopefully, I can do like Oliver Twist and ask for a little more at some point in time, a little later. But Minister, we want to thank you very much for your time. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, I'm Dike Rostant. This has been In Depth with me. Thank you so much for joining us.